In this video, I'll explain how Yuki Contracts works. Yuki Contracts is the same as recurring or periodic invoices. To initiate, you commence with Contract Settings. You can locate that under Settings, Sales Settings, and then under the section dedicated to contracts. The layout is set by default to the same layout as the sales invoice, but you can customize it. Billing period is really handy. You have three choices here: current, upcoming, and previous period. If you select the current period, the invoice will be auto-generated this month. For instance, March. If you opt for the upcoming period, the invoice will be automatically generated for that period. For April, if you select the prior period, Yuki will create the invoice for the previous period. So in this particular case for the month of February, with the Generate Invoice setting, you have the option to have the invoice generated and sent on the same day or 1 or 7 days before the actual invoice date. The date on the invoice remains as calculated from the start date mentioned on the invoice itself. You can find Yuki Contracts from the Sales menu under Contracts. Under the pull-down, you'll find the active, ongoing contracts, the terminated contracts, and the future contracts. These are contracts with a start date in the future. There are two ways in which you can create a contract. You have the option to click on plus New Contract from this location. You can also convert an existing non-recurring invoice into an invoice for a recurring contract. I will demonstrate how it works shortly. I'm starting with a new contract. First, ensure you're in the right administration to proceed. Just like when creating a regular invoice, you start by selecting a contact or creating a new contact. Clear date is the date on which the first invoice will be sent. If you leave the end date empty, the contract will continue indefinitely. The end date is also the window you use to terminate the contract at a later time slot. You click on Edit Contract and fill in the end date. When repeating, you specify the repetition frequency. Generate Invoice and Invoice Period are set as you previously set them in Contact Settings. You can still make adjustments here for this contract. Invoice processing is crucial. If you're fine with this, the invoice will be processed automatically and sent to the customer by email. Figure it out. Every period the invoice is prepared to send in the invoice list, and you have to manually send it by email or by mail. In the timeline, you'll see when the next invoice is created. The subject of the invoice has a nice feature. When you move your mouse over the little you'll be explained this. You can incorporate three types of so-called dynamic placeholders in the subject: period, period number, and year. If you incorporate these placeholders in brackets into your subject line, Yuki will automatically include the period and/or year in the invoice subject. Period gives the week, month, or quarter along with the number, and year gives the year. Period number only displays the number of the period. I'll give you an example of how this works. If I choose the subject of a monthly rental invoice, for example, as invoice rental period/year, then the subject will look like this: invoice for the rental period of January/2024. And the next automatically generated invoice will contain the following month. Payment terms, payment method, and invoice layout will be taken from the invoice settings, but you can adjust them if necessary. Under Attachments, you can upload or link an attachment from the archive. Now you can create the invoice lines. This works the same as creating a regular invoice. Below you have two options: Save as Draft and Handle. If you save the contract as a draft, it will be placed under Drafts in the Contracts section. From this point, you can still make changes to the contract before sending it off for good. Clicking a Fandolin creates contract, adds it to current contracts list. If you're set up for automatic processing while creating the contract, the invoices will be automatically generated and sent starting from the contract start date. Even if the contract starts on the same day as the first invoice will be automatically generated and sent after about 30 minutes. You're all set now, and you can go back to the Sales menu. Or you can use Generate Invoice. This will take you to the first draft invoice of the contract. You can potentially adjust this. Helpful if, for instance, there are one-time startup costs tied to the agreement. You handle this invoice manually and send it to the customer right away. The upcoming automatically sent invoice will solely include the invoice lines that you have generated in the contract. I will just go back to creating a contract real quick. There's actually one more checkbox that you can select when creating a contract, and that is Generate First Invoice Immediately. If you check this box and then click on a Fandolin, your contract will be created, and you will be immediately redirected to the draft invoice for the first period, which you can optionally adjust. Make sure that if you choose to manually process the first contact invoice and you don't actually send it, that this invoice will remain in the list of draft invoices and therefore will not be automatically sent. The automatic sending will start, but only from the second contact period. Another way to create a contract or recurring invoice: create a regular invoice in Yuki, process it, and find the Generate Contract button in the Processed Invoices taskbar. This converts the invoice data from the invoice into a contract. You can adjust the start date, process automatically, and possibly modify invoice lines. Note the start date. No changes made. First contract invoice sent automatically 30 minutes after completed click. Contracts in Sales menu under Contracts. View lists by a pull-down in Sales menu under Contracts. Concepts are unsent contracts that can still be modified. In the All Contracts list, you'll find all contracts with their status. Active contracts are currently in effect. Terminated contracts are contracts that have been terminated, and future contracts are the contracts whose start date is in the future. You can manage the contracts from existing contracts. Under the three dots, you can find contract details. Check out the relationship. This is handy to see what has been factored into that relationship. You can auto-process, temporarily enable/disable. Check contract details to open the contract. With editing, you can easily modify or terminate the contract. A contract ends by specifying an end date. You'll find the contract in the list under Terminated Contracts. You can also adjust or index prices from here. You can easily make adjustments by adjusting the prices. Indexing prices within Yuki is something we've made semi-automated. One reason for this is that a contract doesn't always start on the same date and often includes specific price agreements. Explain how to index price of sales item in contract so it can be adjusted according to current price list. First off, I'm gonna adjust the price in the price list. For this, I go to Sales, and in the submenu, I choose Price Lists. I select the correct price list, choose the sales item, click on the line, and add a new price. I'll also fill in a start date here. That way I keep track of when the prices have changed. The new price is currently in effect. If I initiate a contract at this time, I click on the Edit option and I locate the button to restore default values positioned behind the invoice line under the three dots. With this, I update the price and possibly the description of the relevant sales item. I click on Save, and from now on the new price will be invoiced.